So, Dubad, our next guest, well, welcome to the podcast, firstly. And we try and tell the stories of runners from around the world. And I wanted to invite our next guest on from the first time we met, actually. Last year at Dolomites Run, she appeared seemingly from nowhere, from a European perspective, to podium at Dolomites Run against people like Judith Weider, which is incredible feat. But we've got to know each other this last year as she's traveled around with the Golden Trail. And some of the conversations we have been really fascinating, partly about the culture of trail running in Mexico, but also to do with kind of the pressure of a performance and the expectation of being the best. You're kind of brought up in sport for your whole life, and then you join the global scene, and everyone's been the best, and suddenly you're like, how do I fit in this? So I wanted to chat to her for all these things. So welcome on the podcast, the wonderful Karina Carsolio.
Hey, thank you very much for having me here.
Well, we should probably mention where you are right now, because we're actually going to be together tomorrow, but we're recording it in advance. So where do you find yourself?
Well, right now I'm in Chamonix, which is like the mecca of trail running in France. And the bottom of the Mont Blanc is right behind me, even though it's already night. So I'm pretty lucky to be here.
That's the real backdrop. It's not like a computer generated.
Yeah, it's a window.
Wow, what a cool apartment that must be.
Yeah, pretty amazing view.
And you're not, you mentioned just before that, so you're not running Mont Blanc Marathon, which is the race in the Golden Trail series. What's your plan for this weekend?
Yeah, I'm running on Saturday a race that is more my kind of race that I like, which is more sky running. It's called Monte Rosa Sky Marathon. It's probably the most famous sky running race. It's in the Monte Rosa mountain, which is 4,300 meters above the sea level. It's in Italy, and it's crazy. It's just 17.5 kilometers uphill, and you have a 3,500 meter elevation gain, and then downhill.
Downhill the same amount as well?
Yeah, the same amount. So you go up and down the same way. But it's crazy steep. You don't have like nothing that it's runnable.
Because that's what surprises actually when you appeared at the Dolomites Run. Because I was relatively new to the tour myself at that stage, and everyone had been saying how technical Dolomites was, and also how kind of sharp and aggressive the downhill and the uphill was. Is that something that for you, did it seem that way?
Yeah, it is pretty, it definitely from the Golden Trail perspective, it's the most technical race, or it used to be the most technical race for the Golden Trail World Series. It's like average if you put it in the skyrunning world circuit, but it is pretty technical. But that's what I like the most. I love being in the mountains in places where it's you have to use your hands. You're always uphill, downhill. That's what I like the most.
So does that mean then that there's a lot of technical running in Mexico, a lot of technical trail?
Actually, no, there's none. All of it is very runnable, and it's very much like the Golden Trail series, like the race that's happening this Sunday, the Marathon de Mont Blanc or Sierra Sinal. The races back home, they're all very runnable and easy trails. Rough, so that's why I like more the technical stuff.
Yeah, because at what point how did you learn your skills?
Well, both my parents are mountaineers, or they used to be. My mom is the first Latin American woman to climb Everest. And
wow.
My dad is the fourth person and the youngest person ever to climb the 8,000, which are the 14 mountains are higher than 18,000 meters above the sea level. So, yeah, I was born into that. You know, they always shared with me their love for mountains and nature and being outdoors. Really just being on the trails and on the technical trails was part of my life since I was a kid. So I didn't really know it was a thing you could do well in sports and perform like that. It was just a lifestyle.
So what would your holidays be like then? When you say you were on the trail, like where would they take you at what kind of ages and what kind of feats were normalized to you?
Well, like my very first holiday, so to say, I don't remember it, but I was 2 years old and they took me to Manaslu, which is the fourth highest mountain in the world. And they didn't take me to the top, of course, but I went on the hike, on the approximation hike with them. And I stayed at the base camp for a long time, and we were just on the trails there with my grandfather and both my parents. They were climbing it, so things like that. Then when my other siblings were born, we would come here to Chamonix, for example, to visit one of my brothers. And yeah, it was just like being mountains or rock climbing a little bit. Um, yeah.
And back then, so were your parents both professional kind of mountaineers, or was it? I haven't got a sense of how easy it is to be a professional mountaineer back in what would be in the what 70s? No, sorry, 80s,
Yeah, it
90s.
was 80s, more like
Yeah.
the 80s. Well, my dad finished the 14-day thousanders in 96. So I was already born by then, but most of their career was during the 80s, and yeah, they were like world renowned known back then. Um, but it was very hard for them, because especially coming from Mexico, where we don't have mountains, we have volcanoes, and it's very
Mm.
different, the volcanoes from mountains. Um, so, but it was my dad is very, very, very stubborn, so that's how he managed to do everything he did, and he spent almost all of his youth and like especially his sport life in the Himalayas in Nepal and places like that. Yeah.
And do you think they instilled in you a certain ethos, or do you remember them actually pushing you in a certain direction towards the outdoors or towards trail mountaineering?
Not really. Like, actually, that's a question that I get asked often because, well, because it's natural, right? Like, your parents are mountaineers. But my dad, he was always very scared because like mountaineering at that level, it's very dangerous.
Mm.
And the mortality rate is like 80 or 90%. My dad, he lost almost all of his friends during his mountaineering days. Maybe of all the friends he made, only a couple of them are still alive.
Mm.
So he has been through a lot of death in his life, and he didn't want that for his kids. So he never taught me anything of mountaineering. He taught me about rock climbing and love of nature and being outside. I love being outside, but not mountaineering per se. Yeah. But obviously it got into me because I used to be with them when they went to conferences or when they were training. My mom, even when she stopped being a mountaineer, she kept on doing mountain biking, and she did trail running. So I think the love of the outdoors just was in me, and it was for me. It was a lifestyle that they definitely made it happen for me.
And at what point did you start running then, or did running become something alongside that?
Well, I when I was a kid, I was a dancer. And a teenager. I did jazz and ballet almost all of my life, so nothing to do with trail running. And I used to rock climb quite a bit. And then I studied high school in Canada, and there I started playing field hockey. And when I came back home to Mexico for college, there was no field hockey in Mexico. So just because, I was a little bit rested and I loved doing sports, I
Mm.
started, but it was quite late in my life. I started running when I was 19, well, compared to most athletes here.
Mm.
And ever since then, just I started running, yeah, and then but I started running like at the same time that I started studying medicine. I studied medicine in college, so I didn't really have that much time to train.
Hmm.
But so it was until very recent that I really decided to give it a go and spend more of my time doing trail running, which is like, yeah, 2 years ago maybe.
How would you describe the running scene in Mexico? Because internationally, it was suddenly projected onto the world map with Born to Run, the book, and the stories of the the running tribes and barefoot runners, and but now how would you sum up running in
Well,
Mexico?
I think that's I love the Tarahumaras. Um, and I mean they're Raramuri, which is another name for the Tarahumaras. It means those of light feet. So, but that's like one part of Mexico. Mexico is very broad,
Mm,
especially in its diversity of people. It's one of the most diversity dense places regarding language in the world. So there's a lot of different ethnicities in the country. So the Tarahumaras, yes, became world famous because of, they run a lot and they're very good at it. But if you talk special just about trail running in Mexico, I think it's becoming very popular. We have since have you ever heard of Ricardo Mejia?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Well, Ricardo Mejia, before Kilian Jornet, was the person who had won CF Sinal most times. He's won CF Sinal 4 times, and he was the world champion for skyrunning in 2003, in 2001. He used to be like a rock star back in the day of trail running. I'm not sure you can hear me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm
Oh
just
yeah.
laughing it up. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. And and he's from Mexico. So he kind of opened the door for a lot of trail running in Mexico. Actually, in 2001, I think it was, Mexico was one of the places where one of the skyrunning world races took place, where in the place where I live, which is a volcano. So it used to be more recognized back then because of Ricardo Mejia.
Hmm.
Then it kind of went, uh, up, it disappeared from the European world, but in Mexico, trail running has always been a big thing, I think. And like in everywhere else in the world, it's been growing a lot, the sport. But currently, I think it's one of the places in Latin America that has more level of runners. There's a very, very good level of runners. You also have Juan Carlos Carrera, right? Who he also
Hmm.
got fourth place in Sierra Sinal, sixth place in Marathon de Mont Blanc. So yeah, I think we have some pretty amazing runners back home.
And what surprised me about the because after Dolomites run, we then had Gal and Gyrun, where I thought you were going to absolutely smash it because but you actually, it was the heat that really got to you. And that surprised me because, naively, I'd assumed that most Mexican people were used to the heat, but obviously that's not necessarily the case.
No, well, Mexico is very broad. I mean, the places that are hot are closer to the beach or in the desert. I live right next to the mountains, so it's actually pretty cold, and I'm not used to the heat at all. So yeah, Skyrim killed me because of the heat, but also I had just had like some problems after the vaccine. I have an autoimmune disease, and it that's an arthritis of my hip. It's usually pretty well under control, but after the vaccine, it like my immune system went crazy, and I had pretty bad pain in my hip for the arthritis. I didn't tell anyone. I don't like really like making a big show out of it, but I was under a lot of pain the days before the race, and I think that like mentally, I wasn't dealing well with that because I was like, oh shit, I don't know how I'm gonna perform well if I'm with so much pain. And yeah, it was just like I could tell from days before the race that I was not in a good space.
And, and how does running impact on that? Is it something that has a will have a negative impact in the long run, or does it not really have a build up?
Actually, it helps. The autoimmune disease that I have is called spondyloarthritis, and it's an arthritis of the hip. And movement helps me. Like if I'm sitting for a long time, like after a long flight, or just not doing things, it starts getting really bad. So running helps me quite a bit. Um, and so it's not too bad, but what's really bad is when I have an outburst of the disease, I can't run because it hurts really, really bad to move. So it's kind
Mm.
of weird, but yeah, that happens.
And is that something you feel you've got typically an ability to control and to ensure that you can at least have a sense of when you can train hard and when you'll be able to race well?
Yeah, well, I've been able to detect what triggers it. I'm very careful with the food I eat. I have a lot of food allergies. Well, they're not, well, they are allergies because they are triggers for the disease.
Mm.
So I usually, if I follow that special diet that I always follow, I'm okay. But then, when traveling, it's difficult. So for races here in Europe, I'm always pretty nervous that I'm gonna have an outburst because eating outside, it makes it hard to, not eat the
Mm.
food that triggers the disease. Yeah.
Mm. And so then coming into the Golden Trail, then you've mentioned you've got a love of sky race before, like and you also mentioned how you've been studying until relatively recently, where you've had the opportunity to train more focused just on trail. Like what what were your intentions and what were your ambitions kind of coming into last season?
Wow. Well, actually, I had none because I was just diagnosed with this disease I've been talking to you about. So I went into Dolomites like just thinking, okay, I'm just gonna enjoy it. I actually didn't know I was in third place until after the downhill. So it was awesome for me. It was something that I had not been expecting at all. But all of these people, Judith Wider, Marcela, Nuria, all of these people that I knew about them because I follow them since a long time ago. I've been watching them, on YouTube, on social media, and for me, they're a huge inspiration. So I was not expecting to be racing so close to them, and that just opened a whole new door for me. And after that, I think I was like, okay, so maybe I am at a level that I can compete with them. And I was definitely expecting maybe I was expecting more for the upcoming races after Dolomites, which didn't happen. But up to this point, I've learned that you can't, athletes have ups and downs all the time, and everyone in life. So you just have to learn how to deal with the downs and not let the ups get into your head too much.
And do you think then that the at that point the up did get into your head a bit?
Oh, definitely, especially because because back home, I mean, coming from a third world country and Latin American country, something way across the ocean, and with not such a high level of competition as here in Europe, people are always super stoked when a Mexican athlete has a good result. And I think that's something that happens a lot to other athletes in Latin America. I have a very good friend who also trains with the same coach that I do, but he's a mountain biker, and he won the short track World Cup last year. And after that, he just, the same thing happened to him that it happened to me. And I feel it's just like you put so much pressure into yourself because other people are also putting pressure, and because you now feel that, okay, now I have to give this result, especially because people back home are watching, and they're, waking up in the middle of the night to watch the race. And it just, yeah, you feel like you have to perform at that level.
And with the series in particular, performance is rewarded with invitations, paid expenses, prize money. Does that also change your thinking where if that wasn't on offer, you might not necessarily take in as many races, you might not be focusing on those positions the same way?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like one of the things that I like the most about the Golden Trail series is everything that happens around it. You know, you could be at this amazing place with the other athletes and you just have a great time with them. You know, we always I've made a really good friendships with other athletes and I look forward to being with them. It's not just the race, it's the whole opportunity to be able to be with people that have the same passion that you do, to train with them, to laugh with them, to eat with them. And I just feel like that's the bigger prize. You know, like if you do well, you're going to have this whole camp holiday paid for with all of your friends. So for me, that's amazing. I mean, you get to be with awesome people like you and like other like the camera people, and you just I feel like it's this whole family. I always tell people back home it's like being in camp again when you see all of your friends again, and then the last day you just have this huge race. And for me, that's definitely a big motivation to do well on races.
Now, the season from that point on, you struggled in all the races, and with, I mean, El Hierro was a nightmare anyway. And I think going into that race, you already had a suspicion that you weren't in the form that you needed to be to be competing. What was kind of going through your mind in Skyrun to El Hierro, and then onto when you went to the national championship finals to try and qualify again through that system?
I think I was just uh, I had given up on myself before was even trying, you know. So when you're in that mental space where you are just frustrated because you're not having the results that you're expecting, you tend to find any excuse to stop. Um, that's what frustration does. If you're not, if you don't have the mental capacity to deal with that frustration and go beyond it and to deal with it, uh, anything will be a good excuse to say, oh, this is why I'm not, performing well. And you just break down because it's different. If you know that you're not at your best capacity, then you lower your expectations and frustration is not a concern. But if you're all the time expecting something that is way beyond what your capacities actually are, then you're always going to be frustrating yourself, and that ends up being well, a bad trigger for not enjoying and then being angry and then eventually maybe not uh, doing what you are supposed to be loving. So I think I was in that mental space. I did not perform the way I wanted to perform in Skyroon, and because I think it was a race where I could have definitely uh, done better. And I was too hard on myself. I think that's a capacity that a lot of athletes have, that we demand a lot on ourselves. And that is, it can be very good or very bad because it can be very good to perform well, but it can also be very bad to make yourself feel terrible and not race well enough and not train well enough. And it's kind of like an auto sabotage where you just keep draining energy out of yourself and you end up yeah, just really frustrated. And that's what happened to me. I think I was just in this negative loop of auto sabotaging myself, telling me I was not capable of doing things, especially because when you're with all of these amazing athletes and you're sharing all the time with them, at least I tend to compare myself a lot to them. And that's definitely not easy, but it's very difficult to do it when you're spending 24/7 hours with them, um, and then racing with them. So you just compare everything. Um, that definitely didn't help with all of those races.
And it's because we had quite a long heart to heart as a gamma a few weeks ago, and it sounded to me as if you'd almost had an identity crisis where you'd suddenly you didn't really see yourself in the same way that you had previously.
Yeah, 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 definitely. Yeah, I feel like, for something that's not really talked about in the sport, but I know it's real because I've talked with other athletes about this, is this comparison that I'm telling you, that you definitely lose a little bit of identity because you have this mental image of what an athlete should look like, what an athlete should be like. And if you are not like that, you stop loving yourself and you start criticizing every single aspect about yourself. And well, that I think a lot of athletes break down because of this. And I think that's why it's very important to treat mental health as another pillar, another stone of training, because training the mind is it's very important, especially before races when you're going to be spending so much time with these athletes. You can't be comparing yourself to this mental image of what you should be, because we are all very different. And I think that's something I definitely struggle with. For me, coming from a Mexican background, different eating of being of everything. For me, it's hard not to compare my body to the other athletes' bodies, the way I eat to the way other athletes eat. And I feel like everything just becomes, uh, a number, and you're comparing yourself to those numbers. How much you weigh, how much you run, how fast is your first K, everything is a comparison, and that can be mentally draining.
And I know you mentioned that what was you're so used to winning and everything, and you're so used to being the best, even in Mexico. That because I believe you said your big rival then when you went home, suddenly the person who you'd never seen as being even someone who could compete with you, beat you, which just almost blew your mind because you didn't see yourself as being as you saw yourself as being just a level above her. But she'd raised her game as well. And do you think? I mean, do you want to speak a bit towards that? And do you think it also is that part of the challenge of almost having an identity based on success? Is that it's then always liable to change when results change?
Wow, yeah, definitely. I feel like there's a lot of athletes that deal with this. And, you know, I feel like it's also, well, I do have a sports psychologist, and he told me that one of the first things he told me was that my generation was used to always, since we've had access to a lot of facilities, we are used to being, especially once you are at this level, it's because probably the beginning of your life, before coming to World Cups or whatever, you were used to being the best. And you're not used to then losing and dealing with all of the emotions that come with losing. And when you, when you don't have the tools, the mental tools, the emotional tools to deal with everything that happens when you don't win, it can be very easy to go down a path where you break, instead of taking, if you had the tools, you would, just
Mm.
push more or become a better athlete, a better person. And have the mental strength to say, well, of course I'm not going to be top one all the time, but I feel like I definitely come from a background where, I was very good at school. I was very good in dance. I come from a small town, so it was easy to be number one at everything. And then I excelled mostly at everything I did. I went into med school on my first try, which is hard, very hard back home. I always had very good grades. And then when I started running back home, I would always win all of my races. And so I never developed the tools to have the mental strength and the lightness in myself to, just become better if I lost. And
Mm.
when this girl beat me, and she really beat me. For me, it was definitely like, holy shit. I kind of broke a little bit, and I was trying to find all kind of excuses to why she beat me. And but now I really look forward to racing with her because I've worked on that frustration and on that difficulty on managing the fact that that's what competition is about. Always somebody's always going to be better at you at some point in your life, and that's what makes the sport grow. And we just have to learn how to have the capacities to deal with that in a good way and in a positive way that makes us feel better athletes, not worse athletes.
And do you think there is a way to learn that without experiencing it first? Like if you look back and if you think of other athletes coming through, is there a way in which we can prepare them for eventual losses or eventual failure without them being exposed to it directly?
Yeah, there's a lot of coaches that talk about this theme, and I think one of the main things is you have to have, a plan in case you fail. And a plan meaning like you have goals, but that goals that are tangible and in the short run and in the long run. So let's say, okay, right now my goal is to get at least a top three or podium in the next race that I'm going to. And then my next goal after that is something else. So in case I don't get it, I don't get stuck on that and I don't get frustrated by that because I already have another goal, because that's what the sports is about. You're always going on to the next thing. So I think it's very important for athletes to have short-term and long-term goals, to not get frustrated in case the short-term goals don't work, because you're always going to be performing very good or at some point in your life, and it on your year on your calendar, and
Mm.
it might not be that one race, it might be another one. So you just have to keep your head up waiting for that one, and always pushing forward, because if you get stuck in the goal that you had set and you didn't make it, then it's not it's not going to leave you in a healthy space.
And so now then, does that mean for yourself, like how has that changed what you're seeing as your goals for this season, and how you would have seen your goals for this season if you hadn't had that conversation with a psychologist?
Yeah, definitely, because he also told me, your goals have to be realistic. Like, yes, they have to be something that you can push yourself to. I mean, not super easy, but not also impossible. Because if your goals are impossible, let's say, okay, I want to run a marathon, like 2:20, it's impossible for me, honestly. So I'm just gonna get very frustrated by that. But you have to have tangible goals, but that are also pushing you to the next level. And he was the one who helped me with that. I write down my goals, my short-term goals, my long-term goals, and I divide them by goals that are like numerical goals, like what I just said, right? I want podium at this race. And I have mental goals too. Okay, I don't want to get, and I never write them down in negative. So instead of saying, I don't want to, I say, let's say, I don't want to get frustrated if, if I'm not doing well at a race. The good way of saying it, because your brain responds to positive affirmations, would be like, I want to enjoy when I'm experiencing pain or something like that. I want to
Mm.
connect with the strength that I have within me when it gets really hard, because that's the reality. You can't tell your body, "Oh, I'm super strong." I'm super strong right now, because maybe you're feeling weak, and if you're lying to your body, it's just not going to help you have to give it tools to endure that pain, or to endure that awful uphill or that awful heat. If you just tell to your body, it's not hot, it's not hot, it's not hot, and it's boiling outside, it's not really going to work. But if you tell your body, okay, embrace the heat and move through it, and get to the next aid station, have these little goals in mind, that's what makes it tick sometimes. Um, so I think that's what's helped me for this season is setting tangible goals that are more realistic to where the space I'm at right now.
And I felt a little bit with the last two races. You maybe got trapped by your own watch, and suddenly the pace, you had an expectation on pace that just wasn't possible for anyone, especially in El Hierro, where it's like a desert out there, really. Like, is that something you'd picked up on before, or is that something you're now kind of more wary of?
Yeah, I had never had a watch before until 2 years ago. Before that, I had never run with watch. And for me, I feel like it was definitely something that trapped me a little bit in the numbers. And in trail running, numbers are very, very tricky because you have this, I mean, it's not flat and road all the time. So sometimes you have very runnable uphills, even though they are
Mm,
steep, they may be like very, very easy to run on.
mm,
And sometimes a flat section may be very technical. So I feel like depending on the watch for trail running is not the best tool. Like you once told me, it's good for your intervals training when you're doing it on the road or on the track. But I feel in trail running, it's very important to have training days where you train without a watch to be able to really get into the sensations that you're training with, how you feel when you're pushing really hard, how it feels when you're not. And if you're depending on your watch all the time, you're losing mental strength and therefore strength in general that you could be applying on the run.
and how, when you look ahead for this season now, because last season didn't go the way you'd hoped, but on the plus side, actually it didn't go the way you hoped, not because of a lack of ability, but just because you had some unfortunate situations with your health. So actually, the potential's still there, the talent's still there. So what are you seeing as your goals for this season, or what do you think is realistic?
Well, I'm kind of mixing Golden Trail World Series with the skyrunning races because last year I kind of decided that I love Golden Trail because of everything that happens around it and because it in my perspective, it has the highest level of competition in the trail running world. But it's not the races that I like. Of course, for me, it's like if you have a marathon road background, you're going to do amazing. Like we've seen with Nieke, with Anais Sabrier, with a lot of runners that are not really trail runners, they're more road runners because golden trails are very runnable. They're not technical. And like I told you at the beginning, I love mountains. The reason
Mm.
I run is because I love being in very technical trails. And so for me this season would be to focus a little bit more on skyrunning races. And I would definitely love to be in the top 5 or something of for this circuit. And well, I'm also running some golden trail, but because I feel like it's important to keep that part of running, running fast. So I would definitely love a top 10 in the next Golden Trail races that I'm going to.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And if people at home want to follow you, to get in touch, to see how you firstly do it, the sky run, the sky race, but the future races, what's the best way for them to do that?
I think my social media, Instagram, Facebook, I'm like Karina Carsolio, both of them. So thank you. Thank you very much for having me in your podcast. It was amazing talking with you as always.
Will I get to see you this week, or are we not crossing over?
I don't know, when do you get here?
I'm in, I think, tomorrow lunchtime, and then off
Okay. Then
Monday
yeah,
morning.
yeah, tomorrow I will go say hi to you, to Sarah, to everyone. And also my race is on Saturday. So I come back because catching a ride with Hilary Gerardi, and she's being the English speaker for the Marathon du Mont Blanc.
Oh, cool.
So uh, yeah, so I'm gonna be back here for the race, and I think I'm gonna be a camera runner.
If your legs can take that, fair
If
play.
my legs can take it. Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. Well, I'll see you tomorrow. And thanks again for coming on the podcast, and good luck on Saturday.
Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.
There you go, do-badders. That was Carrie. Don't know if the YouTube carries on filming with just me, my ugly mug. But thanks for listening, do-badders. And yeah, I thought it was really interesting because we'd had a few conversations through the season, and she'd had a lot of health issues towards the end of the season. It's just really hard to see someone who so passionate and so talented, and then being restricted by something they felt out of control of. And having the conversation, I thought that was as a gamma. I don't think many people talk about the pressure of coming through, where you only really hear about athletes who emerge successfully. And particularly if you think about in sports, it's the ones who come through young and are suddenly top of the game. You don't really notice the ones that come through and aren't at the top of the game, who are in the next levels down. And it must be so common for people to have that expectation of always being the best. And how do you then deal with situations where you haven't had the tools, you haven't had the experience? So hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight into what it's like to face that, and hopefully that helps you with when you don't feel necessarily as adequate or your expectations aren't living up. But I love that philosophy of having a long-term goal, short-term goal, medium-term goals, because it's always something to focus on, even if in the short term it's not going well. So that's just it, guys. If you've enjoyed this episode, other episodes that are, well, we spoke to Ninke Brinkman, she won Zagama. We spoke to her last year when she was new to the Golden Trail, before she'd set her 2:22 marathon on her second ever marathon. Judith Wheeler was a few weeks ago talking about orienteering, and prior to that, John Alwyn's been on a couple of times. He's going to be racing Mont Blanc the weekend just gone, I think, by the time this podcast come out. But he's been on 2 or 3 times on the podcast talking about his OCR history, also talking about his transfer into trail and ultra. But if there's any other people that you'd like us to interview, then do reach out to me, david@badboyrunning.com. Please do subscribe and review us. It really helps with our profile and getting future guests. And we try and post in advance questions to the guests. We didn't have a time with Carrie because I've had some personal issues last few weeks, so everything's been very scrambled. But follow us on Instagram and you can then ask questions to the guests directly. So thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye.